I was kicked out of the house on my 18th birthday because my dad wanted a fresh start with his new wife. 10 years later, he came back to ask me to pay for their kids' college tuition. Sorry, do I look like the Massachusetts State Scholarship to you?
I had just turned 28, living in a tiny attic apartment in Cambridge. Sunlight pouring in, strong Wi-Fi, and best of all, no one calling me sweetie when they wanted to borrow money. My morning started with hand-brewed black coffee, 2 hours in a lab surrounded by the faint smell of ethanol, and a few Zoom meetings where I pretended to care about people who never let me finish a sentence. I'm the lead researcher on a cancer cell project at a biomedical institute in Boston. When people ask what I do, I usually say, I help extend lives, and deadlines. I have a PhD, solid health insurance, and a fridge that's never short on white wine. Life? It's not glamorous, not a rags to riches story, just calm and under control. Until that day, I'd just gotten off work, hair tied back with a random lab rubber band, tote bag still carrying the faint smell of cold pizza. I barely had time to toss my keys on the table when I heard a knock, slow, steady, unbothered, like it had nowhere else to be. I glanced through the peephole and nearly dropped the bento box I just bought at Target. Standing at my door was my father, the man who gifted me financial independence by kicking me out on my 18th birthday. Next to him was Claire, his new wife, who looked like a Bath and Body Works candle that somehow learned to walk. And me? I just stood there thinking, well, damn, the universe sure knows how to time a punchline. Some knocks on the door leave you confused. Some leave you uneasy. And then there are knocks, like the one that afternoon, that make you freeze at the peephole, one hand clutching a glass of water, the other resting on the doorframe, thinking, should I answer this with my hand or with a lawyer? Standing outside was my father, alive, not sick, not senile, breathing, and smiling, which was odd, because the last time I saw him was through a windshield, the day I left home on my 18th birthday, after he gently suggested I go stay with Aunt Carla for a while, so Claire could rest during her pregnancy. A gentler way of saying, thanks for growing up on schedule. You can go now. And now, 10 years later, here he was, not alone. Claire stood next to him, wearing a wrinkled beige coat, red lipstick, and brassy 2011 era highlights, like she just stepped out of county fair photo booth. In his hands, apple pie, the kind of apple pie you buy in a panic, when you need a gift but can't be bothered to actually care. No flowers, no handwritten letter, no trace of regret, just the smile of a man who once turned you into an inconvenience, now returning like you were his lifelong plan B. They walked in like this was the next episode of some heartwarming family sitcom, where all old wounds are tucked neatly behind the couch cushions. Claire glanced around my apartment. Her eyes lingered on my coffee machine a little longer than necessary, like she was calculating my income. My dad held the pie like he was about to launch a PowerPoint presentation, solemn, hopeful, and wildly out of place. I didn't ask how they were, didn't offer a seat. I just leaned against the kitchen counter and waited to see what kind of script they'd rehearsed. They didn't waste time. After a few awkward lines about, we heard you're doing well, research on me at an institute, saw your name in an article, they cut to the chase. Aaron, their son, is heading to college. Finances are tighter than expected. They didn't want to impose, just thought maybe if you could help a little. I don't remember their exact words. I just remember the feeling, like watching someone try to convince an ATM that they're family. I took a sip of water. No reaction, no expression, because in that moment, I wasn't the girl who walked out with a suitcase at 18. I was the woman who stood tall after 10 years of being forgotten, watching them now bow their heads, not out of guilt, but out of desperation. They weren't here to make things right. They were here because they thought I was successful enough to forgive them in cash. And that, I thought, was the most expensive joke of all. I used to think turning 18 was when you start exploring the world. For me, It was the day I got tossed out of the family orbit like an old piece of furniture, moved out to make space before guests arrive. There were no screams, no dramatic exits, just a quiet Friday night dinner. Roast chicken, mixed salad, and a casual announcement. Claire needed rest. She needed space. And she needed my room. At 18, I didn't get a happy birthday, welcome to adulthood. I got a soft suggestion that it was time to be independent in a healthy way. Healthy, like switching from soda to lemon water. Sound wholesome, but mostly just leaves a sour taste and a sense that something you weren't ready to give up has been taken from you. My dad didn't call it being kicked out. He called it a transition. Claire didn't call it anything. She just rested a hand on her belly and sighed, like my presence was reducing the oxygen in the house by 30%. I packed in silence, shirt by shirt, book by book, even the old scrunchie I never used but couldn't throw away. I remember standing in the middle of my room, staring up at the ceiling, asking myself, am I overreacting? A classic question from kids who are taught their emotions should always take up less space than the adult's comfort. I don't remember what time I left, just that it was cold. My hands were shaking when I dialed Aunt Carla's number. The woman I'd only spoken to during holidays. She opened the door in flannel pajamas and hugged me like I'd just been airlifted out of a war zone. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. That hug told me everything. Some people don't need the backstory to take your side. I wasn't angry at my dad back then. I just felt hollow. There was no room left inside me for more disappointment. I didn't hate Claire either. I just knew I'd been written out of their story, and no one even bothered to flip back a few pages to remember who I was. In my first year living with Aunt Carla, I learned that independence isn't how they teach it in school. It's not making instant noodles and texting your mom for laundry tips. It's eating dry cereal with tap water, because payday's on Friday and milk didn't make the cut. It's standing at a bus stop at 6 a.m. in the snow, clutching your backpack like someone might snatch your homework. It's go to school and working at a sandwich shop where customers yell at you for spreading peanut butter unevenly. Independence is just a polite way to say, good luck surviving with no manual. I graduated high school with a decent GPA, enough to get into college, but missing one critical thing, a co-signer for my student loan. I drafted the message to my dad like a scholarship essay, every word checked, every comma deliberate. It read, I just got accepted to college. I need a co-signer for the loan. Can you help? His reply came quickly. I'm sorry, but I need to focus on Aaron right now. Hope you understand. No congratulations. No questions. Not a single sentence to suggest he still saw me as his daughter, other than the fact he still had me saved in his phone as Lena H. Maybe the H stood for haunting memory. I never replied, not because I wanted him to feel guilty, but because I knew if I started writing what I truly felt, I wouldn't be able to stop. And I also knew he wouldn't read it. People who choose to leave rarely come back to listen. They only come back when they need something. Just like today. If there was ever a moment in life when everything quietly shifted, no dramatic lighting, no thunderclap soundtrack. For me, it was that afternoon when they walked into my apartment, sat on my couch, and casually asked for help, as if the past 10 years had just been a commercial break between 2 episodes of the same family show. They didn't ask how I'd been, didn't seem remotely uncomfortable about the decade of silence. No, we should have stayed in touch. No, we're sorry for disappearing. Nothing. The conversation began at we're family and ended at we could use a little help with Aaron. And there I was, drinking plain water from a glass, watching the man who had once been my entire world when my mother was alive, now pitching his case like a polite stranger asking me to invest in the future of a child, just not his first one. Something inside me shifted, quietly, like standing in the shower and realizing the water has gone cold. You're not sure when it happened, but suddenly you're very aware of it. I looked at him and Claire, not with anger, but with that distant curiosity you feel when trying to remember why you ever cared about someone. It wasn't about being cold. It was just, I couldn't find a single reason left to feel warmth. I used to believe that with age came less selfishness, that maybe people look back on life and recognize the places where they failed, or at least gone silent for too long. But no, some people don't change. They just learn how to retell the story with better lighting, where they're the victims of circumstance, never the authors of harm. They've mastered selective memory. In their version, they gave me space to grow, not cut off all support when I needed it most. They wanted me to be independent, not just remove the inconvenience of a child from a previous marriage. They believed I'd make it. And I forgot my birthday for 5 years straight while posting about Aaron's piano recitals on Facebook. Claire, as always, was skilled, not in the wise sense, but in the polished, PR-trained way. The way she rested her hand on the pie, the angle of her head when she talked about their unexpected financial strain, all of it calculated. I didn't blame her. Everyone survives however they were taught to. But I wasn't buying anymore. Not at full price. Not even on clearance. When I was younger, I imagined that if my dad ever came back and realized he'd been wrong, I'd forgive him. I'd picture it like a movie. There'd be tears, a hug, maybe even a whispered, "I'm sorry. I messed up." What I got instead was a cold pie and a financial pitch wrapped in a polite smile. No remorse, no accountability, just a quiet expectation that I'd be kind enough to forget everything and wealthy enough to foot the bill for a chapter one was never invited to write. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the abandoned child anymore. I felt like the only adult in the room. The only one who understood. Not every relationship is worth reviving, especially the ones that only exist when someone needs something from you. I didn't respond to their requests, not with words. Anyway, some refusals don't need to be spoken. Sometimes silence itself is a choice, a clear one. When someone walks out of your life as if you were a burden, then shows up 10 years later, expecting you to greet them like no hurt ever happened, simply refusing to play along is enough to make them uncomfortable. And just as I expected, the air in the room began to shift. Claire shifted in her seat, subtly trying to find a position that made things feel less awkward. My father glanced around, as if searching for a reason to justify being here, a reason he clearly hadn't brought with him. They hadn't come to apologize. They hadn't come to ask. They hadn't come to listen. They'd come to pitch a convenient ending to a story they'd once shredded, and now didn't know how to patch back together. I realized this when I looked at my father's hands. The same hands that once held me through fevers, now resting on my table like he was mentally calculating which expense to cut next. And if you think the deepest wounds come from harsh words, you're wrong. They come from seeing the person who was once your entire world, now looking at you like a talking ATM. There's nothing more deafening than a request wrapped in the word family. It's the kind of ask you can't decline without being labeled ungrateful, but you can't accept without betraying yourself. I thought about the years I worked at the sandwich shop, saving for school, the times I pretended to have study group just to avoid telling friends I couldn't afford a movie ticket. I thought about my graduation ceremony, where Aunt Carla sat in the very back row, wearing a dress she'd borrowed from her neighbor. And then I looked at them, two people who once built a whole new family that didn't include me, now trying to cast me as a savior in the next act of a story they wrote without me. But I wasn't angry. Honestly, I didn't feel much of anything. Maybe because I'd learned to put emotions where they belong. Maybe because I stopped hoping a long time ago. Whatever expectations I had of them died the day they forgot my birthday, when I turned 19. Now I was just a stranger with shared DNA, sitting across from two other strangers, in a room filled with everything unsaid. Eventually I stood up, not to see them out, but because I needed to leave the situation, before it started smelling like pity. They understood. I didn't have to say a word. They glanced at each other, then stood. Claire adjusted her purse. My father gave a slight nod, like he was thanking me for listening. And I let them go the same way they once let me go. Only this time, I didn't take anything with me except clarity. After a conversation like that, most people cry, or at least shake a little, play sad music, stare out the window. Me, I washed the glass. Then I opened the fridge, grabbed a can of sparkling water, drank half, and checked my lab emails. That was the moment I realized I was calm, no unrest, no rage, no regret. And honestly, I was a little proud of that. Because if someone had told my 18-year-old self that one day I'd be able to look my father in the eye without feeling hollow or ashamed, I wouldn't have believed them. But I did it, not because I'm stronger than others, but because I had once been so broken, I had nothing left to lose, and no one showed up to save me but me. The next day, I placed the untouched apple pie in the fridge, not to eat, but to remind myself, some people only remember you when they're hungry, never when you were. A week later, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject, Aaron's tuition. Just a few lines asking me to reconsider because family shouldn't be measured in money. I replied with one sentence. Exactly. Family shouldn't be measured in money, nor should it be used as a reason to ask for it. Then I hit block. But hold on, the best part hadn't even happened yet. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at a conference on applied science. My talk on cellular regeneration after trauma was streamed live. During a post-talk interview, I shared a bit of my journey, from the girl kicked out at 18 to the scientist leading a national research project. I named no names. I threw no shade. I simply told the truth. Days later, the article went viral, tens of thousands of shares. People commented things like, "This reads like a movie," and "You need to read this, it'll wreck you in the best way." Claire posted a vague Facebook status, the kind that's supposed to sound deep, but is painfully transparent. Something along the lines of, some people should learn forgiveness instead of publicly shaming those who once raised them. I didn't reply, didn't block. I simply clicked the care reaction, that little icon hugging a heart. Yes, I hugged their bitterness like a backwards trophy for staying kind till the very end. And that was that. No big reveal, no dramatic speech, no victory parade. I just kept living, working, loving someone who deserved it, and bringing flowers to Aunt Carla once a month, because the ones who love you quietly deserve to be remembered loudly. As for the others, they'll keep living too, still thinking I'm ungrateful. And I'll keep living, still unable to recall the last thing they ever did for me, aside from bringing the worst apple pie I've ever received in my life. Not everyone who shares your DNA deserves a place in your life after they were the ones who slammed the door shut. Some people only call you family when they've run out of options, and call you selfish when you refuse to clean up the mess their choices created. Forgiveness should never be a reflex. It's a right, and sometimes that right belongs only to those who understand its value, not to those who only come back when they need something. I didn't learn this from a self-help book. I learned it standing in the snow at 18, holding a suitcase with no one turning back. So if I choose calm over confrontation, if I choose to walk away, if I choose not to reach out one more time, it's not anger. It's adulthood. It's knowing the difference between obligation and self-respect. Family isn't blood. Family is who doesn't make you choose between survival and loyalty. And sometimes, silence is the most grown-up way to say, no. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you ever had a story that forced you to grow up earlier than you should have, if you've ever chosen silence over conflict, or if you're still learning how to tell the difference between obligation and self-respect, share your story in the comments. Your voice might just be the one someone out there needs to hear. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any new videos. A like, a comment, or a simple share from you means more than you know, and it helps me keep telling real stories with real feelings. See you in the next video. And if no one's told you this today, let me be the one to say it. You deserve to be heard,